Hello, everybody, and welcome to Plot Structure Part 2. Here is where we will talk about the different ways to set up your story using a plot line. Today we're going to talk about the plot of our stories. How are we going to set them up? How are we going to organize them? There is a more straightforward, simple way of organizing our story. But there's also a slightly more complex way that you might find interesting and you might want to try with your story. But before we get into that, let's take a look back at our terms that we need to know that go along with our plot line. First off, let's draw our basic plot line. There it is. And to this plot line, we're going to add the definitions that you did yesterday. First off, we have the exposition. The exposition is the beginning of the story where the characters, setting, and conflict are introduced. And of course, since it's the beginning of the story, our exposition belongs at the beginning of our plot line. There you have it. And pretty soon, we're going to need to know the conflict of our story. It all revolves around this conflict or the problem that the main character is dealing with. Next, we have this big middle part of the story, which we call the rising action. Rising action shows the problem your character faces, tells the events of the story in the order they happen. It gets more exciting as the story moves along. We read the whole short story to try to get to the climax. The climax is the turning point of the story. It's the most exciting part. The character faces the problem here. And finally, we know what happens with our character. At the end of the climax, we finally get to the resolution. And again, the resolution is the end of the story where the problem is solved and the writer wraps it up. Most short stories use a basic plot structure. They follow the events of the story in the order that they happen from the beginning to the end. This is called a linear plot pattern. The author starts the story at the beginning, usually by introducing the characters and the setting, then introduces the problem and follows the events in order that they happen from the beginning to the climax and finally through to the resolution. And that's where the story ends. A good example of a linear plot structure is the short story Shells. In Shells, Cynthia Rylance starts the story with the part of the story that she's going to tell. Michael hates living there. He and Aunt Esther are in the middle of an argument. Sure, a little bit further down, we get to the part where the author is going to fill us in on who they are and what they're doing there. But really, this is the beginning part of the story that she's going to tell. She is telling this story in the order that it happens, from beginning to end. And again, this is called a linear plot structure. In order to grab your attention, many authors like to start their short stories at an exciting part and then go back to the beginning so that we can understand what exactly is going on. For example, they will start their short story in the rising action. They'll choose an event with action, something to catch your attention, and they'll tell part of this story, but then before they get to the climax, they're going to double back to the beginning, fill us in with the background and the details, and then move forward and catch us back up to where they left off. Finally, they'll wrap up with the climax and then head to the resolution. Now, I've always called this a looping plot structure because it looks like a big loop. But there's actually an official term for it, and the official term is in medias res. And in medias res simply means in the middle of things. The author is going to start the story in the middle to try and get your attention. A good example of this plot structure called in media res is Good Enough. Let's take a look and see how Rachel Vale uses this plot structure in the story. We remember that when Rachel Vale starts this story, the main character, Dory, is standing in the bathroom trying to clean up her face after having a good cry. We don't know why she's crying. We don't know what's going on. We know that she's attempting to smile and she's hoping that nobody would be able to tell that she'd been crying. But it's a mystery right now. As we move a little further down the page, we can see that the author does this blank line. And right before it, she says, of course, math is what got me into this mess in the first place. And then she backs up to the beginning of the story to give us all the background. My troubles started a few days ago. And she doesn't just give us a little information, she actually backs up and retells the story from an earlier point in time. This is a great example of in media res, in the middle of things, trying to pull the reader in with starting the story closer to the climax. If we were to plot this on a plot line, we would notice that the story is actually started up here, getting towards the climax, and then the author doubles back and picks the story up at the beginning with the conversation she has with her mom and takes it through where she left off towards the climax and then the end where Dory meets the girls out at her lockers and tells them that she has the best birthday present she could ask for. Another book where we see this structure of starting in the middle of things is in the graphic novel War Brothers by Sharon McKay. Take a look at what she does. In this tragic story of a child soldier in Africa, the author starts us way later in the story. Northern Uganda, and the attack is coming. You can see here that the ambush kicks in, and the author takes us to this point in the story where our main character has to make this terrible, gruesome decision. And then all of a sudden we turn the page and it says, a voice from the past, and the author not only takes us to the past, but totally changes color schemes, which shows us that he's going from this high point later on in the story to earlier in the story, how things all got started. Again, a perfect example of this in medias res, where the author starts our story at an exciting part and then decides to back up to the beginning and tell the story from the beginning to the end to catch our attention. The choice is yours. Tell the story in a linear fashion from the beginning straight through to the end, or start in the middle part where it's exciting, tell a little bit of the story and to get us wondering and curious what's going to happen, and then double back to the beginning and fill us in on all the details and tell the story through from there. Good luck deciding.